I'm here right now with a guy that just wrote a very popular book about sprinting. And my first question, are you Dylan Ray Martinez or are you Ray Martinez?
So I'm Dillon Ray Martinez. My dad is Ray Martinez, and we're both professors at Winona State University. So at this point, we're both Dr. Martinez. So it gets a little bit confusing to our students at times. But I am Dillon Martinez. My dad is Ray Martinez. He's one of the co-authors on the book as well.
And you guys, I'm fascinated with PhDs because I have no letters after my name at all. None. I'm the only teacher I know that taught for 38 years without a master's degree. So I kind of mastered in having four kids and coaching three sports when I was young.
Yeah.
So what in the hell is your PhD in?
So I actually have a EDD. So it's a doctorate in education specifically. The difference really in how I usually explain it is a PhD is a doctorate in philosophy, so it's very broad and you pick your subject. And it's not as practitioner focused. Whereas a doctorate in education is specifically focused 100% entirely on education, whether that be from the administrative perspective or the everyday classroom teacher perspective. Which is why I chose that program because I view myself as a practitioner and I still actively am teaching, am coaching. Isn't something I just want to philosophize about, if you will. I want it
Yeah.
to be as pragmatic and practical as possible. So that's kind of why I chose the EDD route as opposed to the PhD route.
And one of your driving forces was that to be able to use that degree to teach at the college level.
Yeah, so I actually had a really interesting route to get to teaching at the higher education level. My master's degree is in adaptive physical education specifically. And I think every coach, regardless of who you're working with, whether that is kindergartners or professional athletes, you should at least for a little bit try to work or teach adaptive athletes in some capacity. If you can teach a kid with cerebral palsy to walk even marginally better, how much easier then is it going to be for you to teach a very able-bodied athlete to sprint correctly? So that's kind of how my educational background. So I went from teaching in the K-12 setting as a PE, health, and adapted PE teacher, got my master's in adaptive physical education, and then a job position at the instructor level, so you don't need your doctorate, came open at Winona State University to run the adapted PE program, and no one applied for it. So my dad messaged me because he's the chair of the department here. He's like, "Hey, son, um, I know you're still pretty new teaching, but this position came open. I think you'd be great for it." And it just happened that my master's was in the specific thing that came open. And one of the things that was on the contract when I started at Winona State was that I ended up pursuing my doctorate. So um, that's what I did. And 3 years later, I'm now Dr. Martinez.
Very cool. That adaptive P thing is not nearly as extreme as that, but I was a freshman football coach for a lot of my football coaching career.
Okay.
And it was the greatest experience in the world to actually teach kids how to play.
Yeah.
Like, and some of these kids have been playing for 8 years, but they still didn't know anything.
Yeah.
You saw the improvement and all that. I think that sometimes we fall in love with these coaches who coach kids that are already semi-professional,
Yeah.
and we realize that it's a different type of coaching when you're coaching kids that already know how to play.
Yeah. Yeah.
The Now your dad was a great coach. Tell me about your relationship with your dad, because I was a coach's son as well. My dad coached 44 years of high school and college basketball. And two of my uncles were successful football coaches. And I really respect coaches' kids because it's not always easy and it's always different. Like
Yeah.
you did not have a normal childhood, and I want to hear all about it.
Yeah. So my dad is my hero in every respect. Um, he was and still is, I think, no disrespect to Chris over at Arrowhead, the best sprint coach in the state of Wisconsin. So he still coaches at the high school that I ran at. And so I got to run for him as an athlete, and then I coached with him for a year. I poached him. He came coach with me for a year, and now he's back at Holman. But he is the reason that I believe that sprinting is a specialized skill and skills can be taught. He took athletes who had no business being in the state finals and made them state finals athletes. Um, and learning from him was the most formative experience that I've ever had in formal education or just education more broadly. But because he was a university professor and the lifestyle of a professor is different from a K-12 teacher, meaning you have much more flexibility, he was my coach for everything growing up. He was always at every game, every concert, and when his schedule allowed, he was the coach for. So whether that be my Pee Wee football team all the way up to high school. So he was directly involved in every aspect of my formative athletic experience, um, which was second to none. So he also, obviously, like I said, has his doctorate in education. So he applies the technical aspects of coaching and of education to kids in the best way that I've ever seen. His ability to relate and portray really complex ideas and make them so simplistic that a kindergartner can understand them is just absolutely next level. So that was my formative coaching experience. He just made it look so easy, and he still continues to do that. So I was a freshman in 2010, and my sophomore year is when he started his run of five consecutive 4x1s in the finals at the state meet, which in Wisconsin, especially our town is less than 10,000 kids. So we were in the largest division, so Division 1 in Wisconsin.
And
We
what
had
town is that?
Holman, Wisconsin.
Where is that?
It's on the west side of the state, north of La Crosse.
Okay.
And so less than 10,000 kids or less than 10,000 people in the entire city. So we're running against the biggest schools in the state, and we're in the highest division. And from 20, I had it written down so I didn't make any mistakes here. From 2012 to 2017, he had a 4x1 team in the state finals every year, so 5 consecutive years. And in 2017, he won the thing. So it's you can't say that you can't teach speed, because if anybody is a case study that you can in the specific environment that he was in, it's him.
Now, you slipped in a word there that I can't let go. You mentioned concerts.
Yeah.
So you're a musician too?
So I've played drums my whole life. But my sister was the more theatrical one. So she was in show choir all through high school. But my senior year was her freshman year, and she was really into musicals. And the musical that year was an Elvis musical, and I love Elvis. So I was like, to do something with my sister in her realm where I can just kind of support her, I thought would be really cool. So I was in the musical that year. I got to sing and dance, and it was an absolute blast.
A Renaissance man. I love it.
That's
And
yeah,
the other thing,
that's hilarious, my
I knew I'd
friend.
like you. I have no musical talent except for my musical taste.
There
My
you go.
musical taste is exquisite. I have a great stereo, but I have no talent whatsoever. And I'm jealous of people like you. The other thing you slipped in there was Chris at Arrowhead.
Yeah.
Chris was the head of the Wisconsin Coaches WISCA, the Coaches Association, and I believe he had me in to speak in 2012, and it was the first time I have ever spoke where a title of my talk was "Feed the Cats."
Oh,
That
cool.
I used to talk that I feed the cats, but it was never a brand or anything. So that was, I actually have a picture of it. I think it was held in Milwaukee at the time, but I have a picture outside the conference door where it said Tony Holler, feed the cats. And so that was like my coming out. So tell people about what Chris has done at Arrowhead.
I mean, I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but my uncle coaches, and my uncle is also one of the best coaches I've ever known. He
Who's
coached
that?
Mark Martinez. So he's a state champion football coach. He he coaches in Sun Prairie, and he coaches high jump. So they hate Arrowhead, which is
Sure.
hilarious. So because every time I bring up Arrowhead and like talk about Chris, he's like, "Oh, those Arrowhead, they think they're." I'm like, "Well, they are." So
They are.
exactly. But something that just recently happened was Chris's daughter, reached out to me on X, because she is a athlete in the
The
lacrosse area.
vaulter.
Yeah,
She's a
and
vaulter too, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
and she reached out to me and she said, "My dad told me to reach out to you to do some training with you." And there isn't a bigger compliment that I could think of to have, because he and I don't really know each other. We know of each other. We haven't had like many conversations, but to have another man suggest that his daughter reach out to you. I have a daughter, I have another one coming soon, and I can't think of a more higher compliment
Mhm.
than encouraging something like that with a daughter. So I just, Chris, if you're watching this, thank you so much. And if I ever get to work with her, she's going to be in good hands. So you have my word on that.
And I think people should understand, um, my listeners in Texas are always dissing sprints in the cold north. They don't understand that Chris Harriet's 41 point something in the 4x1
It's
is
insane.
not just Wisconsin fast. If those kids trained in the sunshine, they would be sub 40.
Yeah.
And if you take those sub 40 kids out of Houston or Austin or Dallas and move them to Arrowhead in Wisconsin, they wouldn't be running the same times. I think track and field is very local. That's why state meets are so
Yep.
fun. And so yeah, I'm just blown away by his team's speed right now. And he reloads every year.
Yeah. Yeah. It's awesome. It's so cool to see. But and like you said, you can't compare Midwest sprinting to anywhere else in the States or anywhere in the States specifically. But more specifically than that is in my experience. So the last couple of years, I'm not coaching track right now because I have a daughter coming. And the school that I taught at, we didn't even have a track. So we had to go somewhere else to have a track. And when we did go there, it was completely predicated on the weather.
Mhm.
So at times during track season, we didn't have a track to work on, which, and this is so common in our area. So at times, the most distance we ever had to work with at a track practice was 30 yards of turf. So the constraints that we have to then overcome as coaches, we have to get so much better at our craft, specifically the teaching and coaching aspect of it, to conf, conf to conf match the confines rather of our environments. And it's not something that a lot of other coaches have to contend with.
I've always said that I think the WISTCA, WISCA, the Wisconsin Track Coaches Association, is the strongest association in the U.S. It's the best track clinic, high school track clinic in the U.S. And I really believe because of that, Wisconsin might have the best track coaches. But you'll never see that because Wisconsin is a low
Right,
population state. It doesn't have 25 million people like Texas.
right.
And so anyway, I just think that people don't realize how good Wisconsin track and field is, and the weather that we have to overcome, and just the quality of the coaches in Wisconsin
Yeah.
is just out of sight. I wanted to get into this as soon as possible, and you've just come out with a book, and
Oh
it's
yeah, yeah.
called Breaking the Speed Barrier.
Yes.
Tell me what you can about the book.
Absolutely. So the book was based on my doctoral dissertation. So my dissertation is frankly borderline unreadable because it's a dissertation.
Good, good, because I have never read a dissertation that was readable. But go ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But somehow it still has over 1,000 downloads. So that's pretty cool. Um, so I took my dissertation, which was titled How Elite Speed Coaches Make Decisions. I wanted to understand how successful speed coaches actually thought about their practice. Not what they did, not the workouts they did, but like how they actually thought about teaching and how they actually thought about breaking the stigma of you can't teach speed. So I endeavored to survey as many elite coaches or successful coaches as possible. So my definition of a successful coach for the study was in the last 5 years, the coach had to have a state champion athlete, have won a national championship, have own a speed coaching facility with documented results of actually increasing speed, or was a current NCAA strength and conditioning coach, or had published on the topic of speed development. So that was kind of my definition of what a successful speed coach was. You're free to disagree if you want, but that was what we decided with. It was hard to come up with that definition. Um, so I sent out, so the study I did it's called a Delphi study. So the term Delphi just means you're trying to get a group of experts to a consensus on a specific topic. So a lot of surveys go out once, the data comes back, you mine the data, and you publish it. So my survey was a little bit different in that I surveyed the same group of people three separate times. And after each round, they were able to see the results of the previous round, which was pretty cool because then they can change their mind based on the rationales the previous round came up with. So that is actually how you form consensus on a topic. So I did this study and the first round had 106 coaches. And then as you can imagine, there was some fall off from round to round because coaching or survey fatigue is a real thing. But my threshold for loss was still high enough to have a good study. And at the end of the study, some of the results were pretty cool. So the biggest area of consensus was what we were just talking about, that the environment determines how you teach speed. I have it right here, 69% consensus. So the environment you have is going to determine how then you go about teaching. The next biggest area of consensus was that technique and mechanical foundations was the most important thing that these coaches worked on, which I thought was very interesting because I see a lot of the conversation around speed not always focused on technique, but rather just focused on output. And I obviously think you need to run fast, you need to sprint fast to get faster. But sprinting is the most impact heavy thing the human body does. The
Hmm.
forces on the body are way higher than anything we ever do in the weight room. And yet you would criticize any coach that would let an athlete hang clean with improper form. And yet we're letting athletes sprint at max velocity with horrendous form. And we just think it's okay. So I thought that that was a really cool aspect of the study that 57.1% of the coaches that I surveyed said that that was the most important thing for them. Um, and then as it pertains to how they went about coaching specifically, it was a step-by-step progression. And when they hit a spot where the athlete wasn't where they needed to be yet, they regressed in their teaching progression. So they didn't just hammer through, they had a progression, they stuck to it, and that was how they went about teaching. So those were the three biggest findings of the study. Took that study and turned it into a book that was actually readable.
And the book, 196 pages,
Yep.
and you say it's easier. I have not read it yet. Um, you say it's easier to read than like a dissertation.
Yes, absolutely. So the feedback that I've been getting is the framework that I had in my mind was I wanted a social studies teacher who has never been educated in coaching in any way to be able to pick up this book and then confidently coach the specialized skill of sprinting. That was the goal. And yet I wanted it to be rigorous enough that somebody with a high level sprinting background could see all of the citations that I put into it, not just relating to my study, but every chapter has a citations list after it. That anybody who is well versed in the literature as it pertains to sprinting would see that it is rigorous enough for them to think it's credible, but also pragmatic enough for somebody who doesn't have the background that we have, for example, to be able to pick it up and immediately have a framework for teaching sprinting.
Did you self-publish?
Yes. Do you want to hear the story behind that?
Yes.
So I reached out to a couple of the big publishers in academia, um, and they all liked it. And as we were getting a little bit further into the contract talks, the percentage that they wanted was so astronomical, and yet they still wanted me to do all of the promotion for it. They were like, "We'll publish it, but we're going to take dang near 90%, and yet we still want to rely on your um, network to sell these books." And I thought to myself, first, I'm not going to get rich off this book, and I don't want to.
No,
I want to fill
nobody
a need.
does.
Exactly. I just want
Nobody
to
gets
fill a
rich off
need.
of a book.
Exactly. I want to fill a need, but I also want it to get read. And I mean, if I can get a little bit back to compensate for my time and efforts and what I've added to the field, I would like that. I'm not trying to be greedy, but I'm trying to get, a fair share at least. So I decided ultimately that it was much more streamlined to just do it all myself.
Yeah, and what kind of a percentage do you get from publishing?
60.
60. That's really good.
It's
And
really
and I have a friend that a basketball guy that has published four or five of his own books, and he talks about how cheap it is to publish. That he actually uh, publishes just to get an editor's book, and then he
oh,
edits it and fixes it, and then republishes it.
that's
Isn't
so
that
yeah.
crazy?
Yeah, that's a good idea though. That
I,
works well.
I mean, it's pretty cheap to
It
get
is.
one copy of the book.
I did the same thing. So here's my editor's copy. Says not for resale. And I ordered a couple of these so me and my co-authors could read through it, make all the edits. So like in here the spacing's off a little bit and some things that you can't see unless you have the tangible book in your hand.
Yes.
Um so I was able to make the needed changes and then the
Re
final was good to go.
then you republish or
Yeah.
like, yeah, that is so fascinating to me. Um, I'm worried. My book is pretty long. Um, and I really don't know how many pages. Do you have any idea how many words were in your book?
I think it's 86,000.
Okay. I think I have 113,000. So if your book's 196 pages, my book will probably be around 270 or something.
Yeah.
That makes
Sounds
sense.
all right. Yeah.
Now, did I see where your book has entered the top 100 ratings in a
So it
couple of
did.
fields?
So the month that I released it was in March, and right away it was the number one new release in the coaching category, which was awesome. Um, I didn't spend money on like advertising or anything like that until a couple weeks later, and I think I just ran like $7 a day ads on X. So something pretty cheap and reasonable. And then it's sold in 5 countries at this point, and which doesn't surprise me because Ireland, the UK, and Australia are way ahead of the US in sport pedagogy research.
And
Um,
maybe there are people still read books.
yeah,
52% of all adults. This is crazy for a guy in academia like you. 52% of all adults last year did not read a book.
yeah, I know.
It's
I've been
crazy.
joking that I'm gonna have an assignment in the fall for my students, for my undergrad students, to just read a book. You get to pick it. It doesn't have to be related to the class at all. But at the end of the semester, I'm going to ask you about the book you read and just have that be an assignment.
Was AI an assistant for you?
Yeah. So I more so for the like formatting because
Yeah.
so I went with Kindle Direct printing and the formatting for Kindle Direct is pretty rigorous. Um, so I use Microsoft Word to format it. I was going very low cost, if you can't tell at this point. And so Amazon or so my favorite AI tool is Claude, and it really helped me with formatting and stuff. I am probably the one of the biggest AI components on campus, or proponents rather on
Yes.
campus. And but we still need to be content matter experts at the end of the day. If we cannot offload our cognition and what we know to a different tool, because like we were talking about on X the other day, it becomes soulless if you
Yes.
rely on it completely for that. So I use it for an editor as well because I don't think I'm the best writer. I've written a lot at this point, but I don't think I'm like really good at it. So having another set of eyes that I don't have to bother one of my other co-authors to double check for me is really nice.
Yeah, it was for me kind of like having two people over my shoulder
Yeah.
uh, for, like a grammar teacher, like for punctuation was that
Yep.
was huge. Uh, if you have a double word, they'd
Yep.
say, no, you can't have a double word.
Delete that.
Yeah, yeah, it's so easy. I would say I accepted less than 10% of suggestions for sentence restructuring or
Yep.
a changing of the words I've used.
Absolutely.
Because I want it to be my book. And
Yeah.
but it was AI and everything I've read, AI as an assistant will really help somebody writing a book, but AI as the driver of the book will be a book you will not read.
Yep. And
That's
it's
so
the phrasing structure that is so common to AI is like nails on a chalkboard to me at this point. It's not only XYZ, it's XYZ. And it's like that's just so let's just say the thing. So one of the biggest parts of writing that I try to be good at is respecting my reader's time. I don't want to drag on an idea longer than it needs to be. Let's tell them what they need to know and then move on. I respect a reader enough to know what I'm trying to say without beating them over the head with it. AI is not good at that.
that's great, and it has gotten me kind of excited now for my book. I'm sure I'll get over that and get terrified again. But anyway, let's get into some interesting questions I've thought
Yeah.
of. Um, can you be a great accelerator if you're slow?
No,
I would agree with that.
I don't think so.
But you would also probably agree that teaching acceleration is easier than teaching speed?
Yeah, just because the speed at which the movement happens is less.
I agree
So
with that.
the margin for tolerance of error goes up. Whereas when you're at max velocity, the margin of error goes down as it pertains to performance, but also specifically as it pertains to injury reduction.
And I think you can kind of think as you're accelerating. You can kind of cue yourself.
Yeah.
Whereas at top speed, I say your 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 brain is like a lizard brain at
Yeah,
top speed.
exactly.
Yeah,
For
it's
sure.
like if somebody yelled, "What's 3 times 4?" You wouldn't be able to answer it. Your brain could not think of it because it's almost so fast that it's subconscious, and that's why it's so hard to cue people into better habits.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good way to put that. I think so many people have been asking about the acceleration versus max velocity and which is more important. Um, I think training max velocity is more important because a lot of the things that are demonstrated at max velocity can be translated to acceleration, but not vice versa. And also the go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say that sometimes I say that max velocity does improve acceleration because it's the same nervous system,
Right,
the speed of contractions, all that kind of stuff. But acceleration does not necessarily improve top end speed.
right, right. And then you'll have the coaches that say, well, other than track, you don't really hit max velocity very frequently. But when you do, you want the whole system to be prepared for it. And if you don't ever expose your athletes to those forces, the first time they do it in a gameplay setting where they're not thinking about it, they're going to have poor technique most likely. Their body isn't going to be ready for it, but they're in competition, so their stress level is elevated in a good way. So they're putting a whole bunch of force into the ground that their body's not prepared for, and that's when injuries happen. So I think part of the reason I'm so passionate about technique work as it pertains to sprint development is from a performance perspective. But as I've said so many times at this point, if your fastest athlete is injured because they had incorrect technique, it doesn't matter how fast they are because they're not on the track, they're not on the field, they're not on the court. So us as coaches should be doing everything we can to ensure our athletes move in a specific way that not just I'm not just saying it, but the literature is showing that is safer and more productive for athletes.
Would you say that if you can get an athlete faster, that athlete is also healthier?
Yeah, absolutely.
Why is that? I believe that I believe that's unquestionably true. That if you're with a coach that's getting you slower, you're at a higher risk for injury. But why does speed correlate with health?
Because the forces on the body at max velocity, like I said a little bit ago, are unreplicatable anywhere else in athletics.
Anywhere.
So if an athlete gets really good at dealing with those forces frequently enough that it's safe, it's their body's going to become significantly more resilient.
I think too that there's something to do with the speed of contractions and even more important, the speed of total relaxation
Yeah. Yeah,
required
exactly.
with reciprocal muscles
Mhm.
that as you know, if if your hamstring does not relax when it's supposed to, it will get injured.
Yep.
And as you said, there's nothing in the weight room or on in soccer, football, baseball, anything like that that ever requires the speed of contraction and relaxation that
Mhm.
happens. And that is all central nervous system.
Yeah.
The other thing about the central nervous system, I say the speed's the most extreme movement.
Yep.
In other words, and I think it's important that we're not talking about repeat sprints at the end of practice or strides at the end of cross country practice or something like
Yep.
that. We're talking about spiking up and getting timed and
Yep.
trying to hit speeds that your body has never experienced. When that happens, I think you have a chance to raise the ceiling of your CNS, which benefits all movement. There's a thing that Chris Korfist says that the when you train the extreme,
Yep.
you train the range.
Yeah.
So I think there's just so many valuable things because you probably heard volleyball coaches say, "Well, we don't sprint in volleyball. Why would we sprint?" And you say, "Well, you don't lift heavy things either, and you need
Right.
to." You know what I mean?
Right.
So
Yeah.
so how do you get through to those coaches?
So the way I've done it, so I did a presentation for a certification that I developed in Colorado one year. And All of the coaches at the school district came except the soccer coach because they said we don't sprint in soccer. So it has been kind of my crusade,
Yes.
specifically as it pertains to soccer, to show how important sprinting is in the sport of soccer. It was identified as the most frequent skill associated with goal scoring for the assister or the person scoring the goal itself. Which so I usually fall back on literature because I don't want anybody to ever think that I'm the person saying it. Because if I say somebody else said it, then it's more credible, and I don't think I'm smarter than I am because I don't think I'm very smart. But I usually fall back on what the research says because a lot of times these narratives that are common in the coaching vernacular just aren't true. Things like you can't teach speed or soccer players don't sprint. It's like, yes, they do. There was another study that showed that specifically in soccer athletes, they were 31% more likely to get a hamstring injury specifically if they demonstrated improper sprinting technique. 31% is a huge percentage that is easily mitigatable if you just take a few minutes a day to focus on speed technique or sprinting technique.
And that's the craziest thing. When I went to France to speak with people in the Federation, they all pushed back. They're like, "Are you kidding me? You're talking about speed. Do you realize how fast we are?" And and say, "No, well, I realize that you're not getting anybody faster."
Right.
You know, and they say, well, like they'll do that stuff like, yeah, less than 1% of soccer is a sprint. Less than 1%. 100% correct. 100% correct. But eventually I will say, describe your best player. And they say fast, explosive. They never say they can endure long
Right.
runs ever.
Right.
So it's really hard. I think soccer coaches may be the most stubborn out there.
Yeah. But also, if they say it's 1% or less, what is happening during that 1%? Goals are being scored during that 1%. The most important part of your sport is that 1%. The whole goal is to get the ball in the goal. That's the 1% that sprinting has been shown to be the most correlated skill associated with it.
And that goes back to Tony Vellani when he said that speed is the priority,
Yep.
but not the majority. He was really talking about training. I agree 100%. But we're also talking about we could apply that to soccer specifically. That it's never going to be the majority. It's never going to be over 1%. I
Right.
mean, what, 55% of soccer is walking and just kind
Right.
of casually moving around. Yeah, I
Mhm.
mean, like really, really, like 1/10 of your top end speed. So the majority might be just sloppy walking around,
Yeah.
but what scores should be the
Exactly.
priority.
Hmm.
I love that. I love that. Tell me now, this might be a bad question because you grew up with um, with a successful coach, but are there things that you look back on that you cringe and say, I had that wrong? I love to hear, like people get vulnerable and say, man, I was pretty stupid about this or that. Was there anything, there probably wasn't much because you grew up right, but is there anything that makes you like, gosh, I wasn't doing it right back then?
I think I relied at the beginning too much on the fact that I myself was a good athlete.
Hmm.
And I didn't think about how I presented information well. I didn't think about how my words impacted athletes from a learning perspective. I just thought I can demonstrate everything really well and I'll just show them. And then kids learn by seeing stuff. So they'll be
Yep.
able to do it then. So I didn't think about how much of an impact and how much of a skill teaching is. So this was yeah, I just really relied on my own ability to demonstrate too heavily. And I didn't really understand how to differentiate to ensure students who didn't learn just by watching me could
Mhm.
still have access to the content I was trying to teach them.
Now, with the actual teaching, um, let's get into mechanics a little bit.
Yeah.
I was in Melbourne, Florida, a couple weeks ago, and Les Bellman, who had just an incredible NFL draft this year.
Yeah.
He had the 2 pick, the 3 pick, the 7 pick. I think 28 guys drafted, and he was showing some video of guys that were slightly different mechanically,
Yeah.
and asked the question, "Do you change this guy?" or do you accept this guy? And so
Mhm.
so it's an interesting it's I love people that are at the top of their game that are still questioning what you do about somebody that does not have conventional arm motion
Yeah.
or conventional. Every sprinter is slightly different.
Yeah.
So talk about common threads, talk about biggest mistakes, the biggest things that need to be corrected, the things that you might see but you don't cue.
Mm,
Talk about mechanics.
okay. So I think this is the area that is it's the lowest hanging fruit. So I think a lot of coaches, specifically in track and field, who don't have a strong coaching background, see an athlete run. They know something doesn't look right, but they can't really put their finger on what it is. Um, so in our book, my dad came up with something called the six ups, and then I eventually added one, so my little contribution. So it's now the seven ups, and
Much better branding there. The
exactly,
seven ups, right?
exactly. And so we try to create a framework of seven specific things to look for from a max velocity technique perspective. And in the book, we go down each of them. When I teach it, I always start from the bottom and go up. So the first up is toe, the second up is knee, third is hips, then it goes chest, chin, eyes, and then elbow. These are seven specific things that you can look for a landmark to see if something is wrong. If an athlete sprints by and you're like, something doesn't look right, one of those ups is probably down. So we tried to create a framework that anybody can pick up and look at and say, okay, I think I know where to put my eyes now from a coaching perspective. They can develop that coaching eye because they know what to look for. So I think going back to your question about when do you change somebody, I would only change somebody if how they are moving is increasing their likelihood of injury. So if how they are casting out is putting the ground contact in front of their center of mass too much, I would change it. If they're having too much upper rotation at max velocity, like their arms are way out to the side, that's going to throw off the coordination of sprinting. Sprinting is such a coordination heavy movement. It's a specific skill. I was arguing with somebody on X the other day about it. Sprinting is a fine motor skill. I don't care what you say. It's a incredibly coordination heavy skill. And if one of the seven in our case ups is out of whack, it kind of throws everything else out of whack as well.
Okay, I need to know more. Let's start with the toe. Tell me about the
Okay.
toe.
So at max velocity, we want dorsiflexion. So we want that Achilles to be stretched. We want the toe to be up. So when it hits the ground, it can just bounce right back up. The next up is the knee. So the
Now,
knee up,
getting back to the toe.
yes,
Sorry to interrupt,
you're good.
but do you agree that landings are on the slight outside of the foot and then rolls to the
Rolls.
big toe?
Yep.
And do you prescribe to the idea that coming off the big toe activates the glute?
Yeah.
That's
The big
that's
toe
the,
is so important.
it's like it's it's really important in the kinetic chain.
Yeah.
Like if you have turf toe, you're screwed.
Yeah. You're
You're
screwed.
screwed. You absolutely cannot sprint
Yep.
with a sore toe.
Yep. So,
Okay.
okay, let's talk about the ankle and foot a little bit more then. So,
Yeah.
in my,
And we could say the most neglected part of the body
yep,
for a sprinter is the ankle foot complex
right, which
because
is what interacts with the ground. It's the
it
thing
is
that does the driving.
it's maybe the most important and it's 99% undeveloped in a weight room situation,
Yep,
right?
exactly.
I mean,
Yes,
we don't like do ankle exercises much in the weight
right,
room.
right.
So go ahead, keep going.
Okay, so I'll linger on that since we're on the topic. So we have the seven ups, and then we have a three T's framework for how a speed session goes. So our framework is the seven ups and the three T's. If you follow that, you don't even have to think, you'll get athletes faster. But the first T is called tech. So I don't use the word warm up anymore. I hate that word.
I do
Um,
too.
I use the word tech because in my mind, as a coach and as an athlete, when I hear the word warm up, my brain is specifically thinking, okay, this is the thing I got to get through before I can do the important thing. I want every minute of my practice session to be purposeful and for my athletes to be locked in. So in my experience, just changing the word has done that for me. So in tech, we do a lot of isometric movements. And all of the isometric movements I posted a whole bunch of them on X a couple months ago. Um, they're all
Give,
focused.
give me a couple of them.
So the first one that I always do is called an A ISO hold. So they'll be up, they'll have one foot on the ground and the other knee at the 90-degree position. So what the framework that I use is I love cereal. And I want to be able to put a bowl of cereal on your femur or on your thigh without it spilling. And you're going to hold it there. So don't spill my cereal. And when I say go, you're going to hold that position. You're going to have your fingertips to the eye on the front side. You're going to have your elbow to the sky on the back side. And you're just going to hold that position, get a good stretch in your pec, and you're just going to be balancing on your flat foot at first. So the first progression is just a flat-footed balance. And a lot of athletes can't even do that.
No.
And then as the
That's
season,
also something that Ken Clark has
yeah,
really been huge on too. And that's just that A ISO hold. You're just in a big in the front position and
exactly.
bouncing.
Exactly.
Okay.
So, um, at the beginning of the season, we do 30 seconds each side during tech for the A ISO hold. That's our first tech, or that's our first ISO movement during tech. As the season progresses, at like the 10-second mark, I'll say go again, and then they'll go up on their toe.
Mm.
So now they're actually in that position we want them to be at ground contact. And at
And
the
they're
first
no, with no support.
with no support.
Okay.
And they look like baby deer. Doesn't matter how strong they are. They look like baby deer. The freshman girls, all the way up to the senior boys, who this is their first year out. I can always tell who has been doing my program by how good kids are at A ISO holds when I tell them to go up. So at the end of the season, though, they all look the same. They can hold it for at least 15 to 30 seconds in that high heel position, and they are rock solid, whereas they weren't that way at the beginning. So A ISO hold is one of my favorite ones because then I actually go around and move their body where I want them to be. You can't do that at max velocity. So one of the things I look for the A ISO hold is for the foot that is up, I want the ankle to be even with or slightly behind the knee that is up. I don't want that. So like if this is the knee on the top, my top hand,
Yep.
I don't
Yep.
want that ankle to be casted out in front at all. So if I see that, I'll grab the ankle and I'll move it under or slightly back because I want that down and back motion at max velocity. I don't want that foot to be going out in front. Because again, that's just asking for injury. Um, but also at the same time, as we are doing technique enhancing and ingraining isometrics, they're also getting that strengthening opportunity in their foot and ankle.
I love it.
Yeah.
Let's go to the knee.
Okay. So the people who say that knee up is a bad cue, it's a bad cue if you don't add context to it. So I want the knee up as a result of putting lots of force into the ground. So if you have a basketball and you drop it from an inch off the ground, it's going to barely pop up. But if you have a basketball and you drop it from 3 feet off the ground, that thing's going to pop up way higher. So I want the knee to have the opportunity to be high enough to allow the foot more of a distance to travel to the ground to then elicit more force into the ground. That's why I want the knee to be up.
And then what I talk about is a hammer. If you're
Mm,
hammering a nail from 1 inch away,
there you go.
it's going to take a long time.
Yeah.
But we've both seen carpenters that could drive a nail with one stroke, and they're
Yep.
not 1 inch away.
No.
So it's the
Exactly. That's
same.
perfect.
It's the same idea. I like both, and we're constantly trying to like make connections with kids, and they learn from things like that much better than they learn from like physics terms.
Yep. So that term, to be fancy, is called pedagogical content knowledge. When you
Oh,
tie
say that again. You're
pedagogical content knowledge,
you're
PCK.
showing off now, man.
I have to a little bit. I got to put this degree to use somehow. Um, so pedagogical content knowledge, PCK, is when you take something you know a kid knows and then tie it to what you want them to be able to do.
Got it.
That's the idea of PCK. So a hammer, a basketball, that has nothing to do with sprinting, but they can then
No.
see the translation and correlation between something they already know in a concrete way, and then they can apply it to their movement.
Okay, so there's the next one, the hip.
Yes. Yes. So
Tell me about the hip.
the hip, if it's spilling forward, the meaning the anterior tilt, anterior pelvic tilt, and you have the water. If the hip's a bucket, the classic example, if it's spilling out the front, it's going to do a couple different things. Your knee range of motion is going to be lessened because of the shape of the femoral pelvic connection, if you will. I usually demonstrate it. I'll have a person stand up and like push their butt out like a duck on the backside, and I'll say, try to get your knee as high as you can. And it doesn't even get close because it pinches, the femur pinches to the iliac.
Yeah.
So if the hip is up, you have full range of knee motion.
Now, now, if you cue stay tall, does that does that have the impact on the hip we're looking for?
It depends on the athlete and
Okay.
depends on how familiar they are with how to move their bodies. Some athletes, a lot like gymnasts specifically, have a lot of that tilt. So if I have a gymnast who comes out to sprint, I'll say stay tall, or I'll say get tall, and they only get tall from their sternum up and their hips stay down. So the thing that I like to do to help athletes' hips get in the correct position is something called the diver's pose. So I'll have them be on just flat-footed. I'll have them reach up as high as they can over their head, go up on their toes and try to get as long as possible. And in that position, your hips automatically come up. And then I'll say, just sit back on your heels in that same position. Don't change anything. They come back down on their heels and now their hips are in the correct position.
Love it. So we're done with three of the seven ups.
Yep.
Let's go to the fourth one.
We got the chest.
Yep.
So at max velocity, we want that xiphoid projection. We want our chest to be up. If our chest is down, our hips are probably down, our head is down, and our eyes are probably down. So it ruins a whole lot of stuff. Staying tall, again, is a very, I think, nebulous term because it could imply a lot of different things. So I like to be very much more specific. So hips up instead of stay tall, chest up instead of stay tall. So the
And
chest, go ahead.
Chris Corfus talks about leading with your heart.
Yeah, that's
That would be
perfect.
the same
Exactly.
thing, right?
Yep, exactly. If you watch
Lead with your
any,
heart.
yep, if you watch any of that's so much better than xiphoid projection. No one knows what the xiphoid is.
That's the problem with, being having that doctorate degree. You just can't, like talk normal anymore. It's like I'm still trying to remember help me out there.
Pedagogical.
Pedagogical. That's the first time I've ever said that word, but go ahead.
There you go.
Pedagogical
Content,
what? Content,
content, knowledge.
knowledge.
Yes.
Okay, I'm gonna throw that out at a clinic just to
There you go.
let them know that I've had a podcast with Dillon Martinez. Um, I love it. I love it. So we're on number five now.
Yes. So we got chin. So we
Chin.
want our chin to stay flat. We don't want it to come down. And we also don't want it to be too up. So we don't want it to make the sail, as we have seen so frequently.
Yes.
So the chin, we want it to be up but neutral. But I can't say chin neutral in the seven ups because that breaks it. You know what I mean?
Yep.
We can't have that. So we
Yep.
want the chin to stay flat at max velocity, nice and loose. After the chin, we got eyes. So something I see a lot, whether it be 400 or on, is the eyes will come down ever so slightly when they are sprinting. And every step you take with your eyes down is going to shorten your stride by at least 2 inches. So if
Wow.
you think
Say
about
that again. Say that again. I need to hear that again.
so every stride you take with your eyes being down is going to shorten your stride by at least 2 inches. So think about that over the course of a 400, an 800, or a 5K.
I was going to tell you uh, our cross country program under Andy Dirks, the last 4 years, fourth, second, second, first in the
Mm,
state. So obviously a very elite program. But when he first came to Plainfield North, when I told him the cupboard was bare, and that was like very honest, um, we had a distance crew that I would just say, eyes, eyes,
mm,
because they were constantly looking down.
yep.
They never look forward, and I think
Yeah.
they're trying to. There's something about trying to lessen the pain
Yep.
or discomfort that
Yeah.
you're kind of checked out.
Yeah.
That 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 you just want to close your eyes and be, but you really need to be up and eyes forward, right?
Yep.
No, nobody ever,
Absolutely.
none of the elites ever run any distance without eyes being open, alert, and forward.
Yep. Exactly.
Very cool. So it was that number five.
That was six. The last up is elbow. So elbow
Elbow.
up on the backside
Hmm.
specifically. So I want a big elbow on the backside. because I want as much of a stretch in that pec as possible to take advantage of that elastic energy coming down and through. So what I look for the elbow is I want the humerus to be parallel with the ground, just like I want the femur to be parallel with the ground in the
Yep.
up position. And then I want the wrist to be stacked underneath the elbow as much as possible.
I use the term the hand must cross the hips, which indicates that the arm has to be long.
Yep.
Otherwise, your hand's up by your waistband.
Yep.
So I want that hand to cross the hips and go past the hips. So I say hands past the hips. But Carl Lewis, just to drop a name, told me one time I was actually driving him to a track football consortium where he was in 2017, where he was the keynote, and we're talking about these things as I was missing turns on the way because I was so nervous.
Purposely.
Oh God, it was I was he probably thought I was an idiot. Um, and he said elbow to the sky.
No way. That's what I say.
There you go.
I
So
say fingertips to the eye, elbow to the sky.
he probably got that from you. Take that, Carl.
That's awesome.
I hope you copyrighted that. You can sue him. I hear he has money. Uh,
That's so
that's
cool.
great. Now I cannot help but and be totally honest with this. I've gotten to know this guy I call the Nikola Tesla of speed training, David Weck,
Right.
and and he talks about with the arms that too many people saw. He calls it
Mm.
sawing back and
Yep.
forth. And what he says is there's more of a V, which
Mm.
which I see you looked up and made you think. What he's saying is it's such a downstroke
Yeah.
that as the elbow goes up, it doesn't just swing back like a saw, but it
Right.
goes back down and up.
Right.
Like so it's kind of an interesting thing, and we could get in the weeds with this all the time. And then also, he's real big on the idea of that the that the spine is not
Yep.
braced, that the
Right. It's
and
fluid.
it's fluid. When we see African American fast guys at the combine that have dreads in the back, their
Yeah. Go
dreads
side to
do
side.
not stay. If they were braced, they would stay central, but instead the dreads go left, right, because
Right.
one side of the body shortens while the other, he calls it coiling, and the other side
Yep.
lengthens. And there's also a little bit of rotation in the hips and an opposite rotation in the shoulders that creates torque. And
Yeah.
it's just it's just fascinating. And and then also the head does wobble back and forth, which causes those dreads to go back and forth because it's head over foot. But what's interesting to me is just because it's true does not necessarily mean we cue it.
Yeah.
So I have yet to tell anybody that they need to coil and lengthen and to twist and counter twist.
Right.
But what it's still important to know those things because I see it now when I
Yeah.
see people run.
Yeah.
And sometimes that whole brace spine is just it's just too much try hard. Uh,
Yes.
I don't know if Bolt actually said this. I've heard this that Bolt said knees up, shoulders down, which is an interesting thing because I think when we try too hard, our shoulders get up
Yep.
and it stiffens our whole body, and we run kind of like a goofy robot
Yeah.
instead of this guy that runs 4.25 and makes it look easy.
Right. I think so. I've been looking at a lot of Wex stuff, and I think he's on something. The thing that I see most frequently, specifically with younger sprinters that have specifically done like cross country in the past,
Mm.
is the shoulders do a lot of sideways rotation like this, and their arm is like crossing the midline on the front side.
So there's too much.
I think so
So
because
just because their shoulders, everybody's shoulders will rotate a little bit,
yeah, it's a circular joint.
but but I think it's important to note that there could be too much and there could be not enough.
Yeah, yeah, I think so.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So um, that was absolutely fascinating. I didn't know we get into each of the seven ups, but I think that's people are going to love that stuff. Tell me about the weight room. What are your feelings on the weight room?
So I am weight room agnostic.
I
I think
kind of
the
am too.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's how I usually phrase it. So I mean, obviously, we need to be strong to be fast.
yes,
Um,
strong is good.
Strong is very good. I think, like personally, my relationship with the weight room is kind of bittersweet. When I was growing up, I was the fastest athlete on my team, and I've always kind of been bored in the weight room, to be honest with you. Um, but I was kind of chastised for that. I was kind of cast as lazy. Um, but on the field, I performed well. But there was this kind of idea that the kids in the weight room who tried really hard, irregardless of how they performed on the field, got more attention and accolades. And I was like, okay, if the main thing is performing well on the field and I'm doing that, why am I being cast at, or chastised as being somebody who is lazier, if that kind of makes sense? I still
And it's
worked hard.
partly because you're fast, and fast people rest and recover better than slow people. And I would say you are a cat.
Yeah, that
You're a
means a
cat.
lot that means a lot coming from you.
You are. Now that can also be a derogatory term because if you're pure cat, you're a pain in the ass to coach.
Yeah,
And I
exactly.
think that you were probably, you're probably good with getting coached. So
Yeah,
you don't want to be a pure cat, but you
right.
would like to be mostly cat.
Yeah. And there was this idea that because I wasn't visually working as hard in the weight room specifically as perhaps my teammates were, that I was selfish and just wanted to focus on me and all that. And then I get to college, so I got a scholarship to play football at the University of Minnesota Duluth, and I played as a true freshman, and I played corner, and it was an awesome experience. Um, but I went up there right after I graduated high school, and I hit the weights harder than I've ever hit them. So my goal was to play as a true freshman, and I weighed 162 pounds. So I needed to get some mass. So I needed to eat and I needed to get stronger. So I didn't sprint for probably 2 months, and all I did was lift. And then we had a sprint workout, and I was like, all right, now's the time I get to show what I'm actually good at. I'm going to talk my talk, and I'm going to show these boys that I'm here for a reason. And I pulled my hamstring, and I had never pulled my hamstring before, never one time. Then I go to the trainer's office. And this is kind of where things shifted for me and how I view speed as a teachable skill and how I wanted to someday make an impact on the field like my dad has made an impact on me. The head trainer at the time said, "Oh yeah, you're Dillon Martinez, right?" And I said, "Yep." And I said, "I'm very excited to be here." And they said, "Well, the coaches are happy to be here or happy that you're here because you're fast and you can't teach speed." And I was like, "Man, so they really just think they need to recruit fast kids and then just hope they stay fast." And I
What
remember
percentage of college coaches believe that?
most.
90?
I think it's changing.
I think in the S&C world it is. I think the actual college football coaches don't even think about it anymore. They just assume that they recruit speed and then screw it. We don't have to
Right.
work with it anymore.
Right.
Go ahead.
So I remember thinking like, man, they really think that they just need to get me bigger and stronger and then I'll stay fast. But like I said earlier, it doesn't matter how fast I am or any athlete is if they are injured, because then they can't do the thing they're recruited to do. So I remember thinking at that point, like, okay, someday when I get the opportunity, I'm going to be a coach who doesn't believe that speed is just a gift, because it is to some extent, but the ceiling can be raised so much higher than I think most coaches think.
Yeah, when weight room people say that, for example, track just reveals speed,
Mm.
I'm like, well, you know what? The weight room just reveals strength.
Yeah.
And then they punch me, like, but it's the same thing. You've seen people that were strong walk in the weight room and they bench press a lot the
Right.
first time they ever do it. So everybody's genetically,
Predisposed to something.
to something, but
Right.
everything is trainable. And I
Yeah,
love the
exactly.
idea that we can talk about, the weight room. One of the things that so many people talk about the weight room is that it creates durable athletes,
Mm.
like bulletproof athletes. And I think they are right in the fact that football players that weigh 162 need some body armor.
Yep.
there is no question that there is a look that's required to play college football that might not be required at a small school in Wisconsin.
Yep.
Having said that, I say that if you're not sprinting along with lifting, that the weight room can actually cause problems
I
with
agree.
injuries. And no one wants to say that.
I agree so much because it's like upgrading the torque on a car without upgrading the brakes or the suspension. You're just asking for that transmission or the frame to just crack under the newfound power of the what the motor can output.
Have you ever seen that kid that walks into your speed session, for the first time and they kind of waddle in because, they're so tight and their arms are away from their body and you're
Yeah,
like, "You've been lifting a lot, buddy?" And he goes, "Oh, yeah, man, I've been lifting a lot." That kid's going to get hurt in the first week, right?
exactly.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's just you can just tell by the look. Here's another question. Um, is there a single lift in the weight room that fast people do well and slow people don't?
That's a good question.
I'll
I
let you
think,
think. Go ahead.
is there a single lift in the weight room that fast people do well that slow people don't? I mean, anything's super explosive, but then at the same time, oh, that's a good question. What are your thoughts there?
I I say there is no lift. And people will argue cleans because the bar moves at like a meter a second.
Right.
And I'm like, you know what? I've seen slow people
That's
clean
what I was
pretty
just gonna
good.
say. That's why I
Like,
was in a conundrum.
and then compare that with watching a guy tuck jump where his ass is like 9 feet off the ground,
Hmm.
or watch a 5'9" kid go up and dunk with two hands. You can pretty well predict speed
Yeah.
because slow guys cannot do either of those two things.
Right.
And so
Exactly.
so I think the weight room is supplemental. I think
Yep.
strength is good. I
Yep.
think that the weight room should never interfere with the sport in season or with speed training itself.
Yep.
That we should never drift from a state of performance.
Yep.
Um, but I am not anti-weight room,
Yeah.
and that's, I think you're on the same page.
Absolutely. So while we're talking about the weight room, I got to talk about one of my best friends, Eddie Hodges, who is a
Yes,
co-author in the book.
there
And
was three authors of your book, you, your
yes,
dad, and
and
Eddie
Eddie
Hawk.
Hodges.
Okay.
Yes. So Eddie, I wrote a piece on Eddie a couple weeks ago titled "Winning as a KPI." And so winning as a key performance indicator. So Eddie grew up in Caledonia, Minnesota, and his dad Ernie, shout out Ernie, started the weight program at Caledonia. Caledonia at one point had the most consecutive wins of any high school football program in the nation.
And it's a small school.
It's a very small school in Minnesota. And so he played there, and then he took over the strength and speed program there. So while he was playing, he won a mess of state championships. And then after that, he has gone on to win or be a part of 28 state titles directly, not just like a kid came into his program or into his facility and then they won a title somewhere, like directly involved, meaning he is either on staff as a coach or he's being contracted by the school to run all of their strength and speed development. So when I talk about the weight room, he is my default. So I don't feel like I need to be super. I mean, I have certifications in the weight room and whatnot, but he is the guy who gives people certifications. So I default to him in that realm. So in 2023, I coached the state champ in the 100 and the 200, Colin Kazemius, and he had the fastest time in any divisions. While I was doing that, Eddie was doing all of his strength training. So we have been in cahoots in the same way. My dad at home in high school coached the fastest female in the state following Eddie's strength training program at a different school. So in our conference in the area, Eddie contracts with all but two schools at this point because he took over the strength and conditioning at Aquinas High School first, and then they won 3 consecutive state championship titles in football. And then everyone else is like, okay, this guy Eddie kind of knows a thing or two. He's like, yeah, his Caledonia was the most winningest football program in the state in the country for a long time, and now he is very he deserves more flowers, I think, which is why I wrote that article about him.
He also needs to be on a Feed the Cats podcast.
We'll make
But
that happen.
I always love hearing people boil down or simplify. what what is unique about his approach compared to he must do some things differently, right? You can't be different than everybody else by doing the same things.
Right.
So what's his secret?
I think first and foremost, he's not afraid to be very open about the idea that we are chasing winning, and that is the culture.
Number one.
Number two is his programs are very simplistic. You don't need to have a whole bunch of this background knowledge to be efficient going through the program. So the learning curve is low for athletes. And then from there, I think the culture he's able to build in a school with athletes is unlike anything I've ever seen. So a lot of private entities. So he owns his own gym. It's called Three Rivers Performance in La Crosse, Wisconsin. And he contracts with other high schools in the area. He will himself or one of his coaches will go to that school and then run everything in the school's weight room. He doesn't want kids to come to his facility. I think a lot of private facilities try to get all their kids to come to their facility. You can't build a culture like that. And he knows that.
And that comes at the cost of high school football teams and high school
Exactly.
track teams that need to be training to get. I love that. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I think the simplicity, the unashamedness, if that's a word, he has in trying to chase greatness, but then also the culture he's willing to build at the expense of bringing more bodies into his facility.
Now, I had never heard of Caledonia before until my good friend Brian Kula said that he had been there a couple times. And
Yeah.
I'm like, is that a big place? He goes, no, it's a tiny place. So was he instrumental in getting Brian to come?
I think so. I can't remember if I know. So Eddie has told me that him and Kula talk like weekly. So they're pretty close. I think Kula grew up in Caledonia. I'm not
Oh,
100% sure
really?
because
Okay.
that's where Eddie grew up. So I think that's where they kind of met. Caledonia is a crazy place. So there's a book by Mark Esch called Rise of the Warrior, I think. He is the head football coach at a high school in Mankato, Minnesota. But he wrote a book on Caledonia and like just the history of the program. And in there, he talks about how there's been Navy SEALs that have come out of this small town. There's been NFL athletes. There's been like multiple state championship coaches in other areas, all stemming from this small town. So that's another good book to go pick up. Um, but something is going on in Caledonia, and Eddie has done a good job of capturing it and then bringing it to his facility, which he has then used to go make huge impacts in the life of kids at all these other schools.
That's so cool. What I think that both of us see a lot of stuff gone wrong at schools.
Yeah.
I just posted on Twitter today. You know, I didn't call out the coach by name, but I explained some of the things that were going on. And if as my daughter on that team, he wouldn't coach next year
Yep.
because kids only get one chance to go through it. You don't want a low information coach who's also a stubborn know-it-all.
Yep.
And what things get you like fighting mad that you see in programs where kids are being underserved?
Man, like you said, I think anytime a coach thinks they know more than they do, it's dangerous. I, through all the different levels of education, every level has just revealed more that I don't know. So I think, well, oh, you have a doctorate degree. You should feel pretty confident in all that you know. I'm just more confident in what I don't know. And that
Yes,
makes me more hungry to try to learn more because I never want to be the limiting factor in my athlete's success. So
yes,
because of that, I'm trying to be as on the forefront of both the literature aspect, but also on how I can then transform every new thing that I learn into a meaningful coaching strategy. I don't want there to be this wall between academia and practical application. So I think helping coaches understand what they don't know in a way that doesn't make them feel attacked because so many coaches are so prideful.
yes. Stubborn. It's
Yeah,
part of being a good coach is to
it
be
is part of being a
confident
good
and
coach.
stubborn.
So in Ralph Mann's book, The Mechanics of Sprinting and Hurdling, that he talks about the guru complex, that all good coaches at some level think that they are the best coach for that athlete. And he posits the idea that you kind of need that. So I think that's good. But I also think being cognizant of what you don't know is very important as well. So for example, the athlete I talked about who was the state champion, the one and the two, a couple years ago, Colin, he just won indoor nationals in the 400, by the way, running for lacrosse. So he's an absolute stud. Um, he was the state champion, the one and the two, the year before I took over the program as well. So the head coach at the time, Chris Carley at Aquinas, called me and said, "Hey, we have a sprinter who just won the one and the two. I want you to come in and take over the sprinting program." And I was like, "Okay, um, thank you, but also I feel like I just been handed the keys to a Ferrari and they told me to not crash it." Because the worst thing that could happen to me is come and take over a successful program and make it worse. That would just be awful. Or for him to not repeat in the one and the two again. So that was my biggest fear. So because of that fear, I did everything that I could possibly think of to ensure that I was giving him the best coaching experience that I could possibly give him. And I knew that the level that I was at before I got there wasn't it. So I needed to up my game as much as possible. But I did that because I was cognizant of the fact that I wasn't at the level that I wanted to be to allow myself to not be the limiting factor in his success.
I saw where you, I think you put out something on X the other day, saying that X um, has been important to your development,
Mm,
Twitter.
yeah.
And I know that like three or four different things happened to me about the same time. It was around 2013, 2014. I started writing, and I got on Twitter, and we started the Track Football Consortium.
Yeah.
And I was, gosh, I was 55 years old. And I've learned more in the last 12 years than I learned in my first 55. And
Mm,
I'd won three state championships and things. I had things that I could say I know it all already, you know. But I think not only have these years been really exciting for me, uh, but I've learned a lot and had fun doing it. And so many people think that Twitter is a cesspool of Nazi porn and stuff, and it is. But done right,
yeah.
we can create networks. I would not know you if not for Twitter.
Right.
And you've had a similar experience?
Yeah. Yeah. I think being willing to put yourself out there and being willing to look stupid in front of the masses, um, but also like actually trying to go there to learn from people and not
Mhm.
just to espouse all that you know, but also to be a sponge and intake and learn from the people who you know are better than you. You got to have that heart posture going into it. Otherwise, it's like you said, it's just going to be a cesspool.
How old are you?
30.
30. So you were four when I started feeding the cats in 1999, when I went from old school to new school. I love that. You know, it's exciting for me to know that you have 35 more years uh, to be my age and to continue to learn and lead and all those things. Where do you see yourself in 10 years, 20 years?
Man, I think so. It's interesting because I have my fingers in so many different pies, if you will. So I love coaching and I love teaching. I love higher ed. So those are kind of my three veins. Um, and most people are really only in one for a career. But so one of my dad's favorite quotes is know something about everything and everything about something. So because I've tried to live that out, um, I have all these different interests. And if I were to just focus on one of those three avenues for the rest of my life, I think I'd go crazy. So in 10 years, man, I think, well, I have at least three more books on the way.
Or do you really? That's
Yeah.
going to be my next question. Like I will never write another freaking book in my life. I mean, it's been 6 years of hell for me, but
Yeah.
you've liked it. You have, what are your next three books?
So so the first one that's coming out is I made reference to it in Breaking the Speed Barrier, and it wasn't done yet, and that was a mistake because I've had multiple coaches say, "Hey, where's this book?" I was like, "It's on my desktop still, and I'm so sorry." So that book is called The Seven S's of the Start. So we're going to really focus on teaching the 4-point and 3-point stance through acceleration. Again, using the same kind of flow that I use for breaking the speed barrier. I
Right.
want a coach that has no idea about acceleration mechanics to be able to pick it up and then confidently teach it. So that's the next one. After that, so the book tentatively is called Sideline IQ. So again, it's focusing on the cognition and decision-making process of successful coaches. So many books that I've read in the coaching realm just talk about like a biography of a successful coach, or what a successful coach did. But I feel like there's a gap in how successful coaches go about thinking about their profession as a coach. So I'm going to draw on the study that I did because there's a lot of good information there, what the literature says, but then also each chapter is broken down into what the literature says broadly, what my study says specifically, and then my practical application of the ideas in that chapter. So I think one of the things that I'm unique in is I'm not just in academia and I'm not just a practitioner. I try to fuse the two as well as possible, which I don't feel like a lot of people are in the position to do, and I'm blessed to be in that position. So I'm trying to fuse all of my interests into one topic
Do you read non-coaching material?
more than I read coaching material.
I knew it. I knew the answer because you're way too much of a Renaissance man to just be reading Ralph Mann every day,
Yep,
right? Like
yep,
that doesn't, like you can get stuff from Ralph Mann, but you cannot. There's something about great writers. And I was asked the other day by a really young guy um, that he wants to become a consultant and things like an
yeah,
influencer and stuff.
yeah,
And I told him you need to read 1,000 books.
yeah.
And he says, "Well, I haven't read one in the last 5 years, so nobody reads anymore."
I know.
So I just don't think you can be a great writer
You can't.
without in your brain knowing what a good sentence sounds like, looks like, feels like.
Yep, yep. I
So
think so I approach writing to learn what I think about something.
yes.
That's kind of how I think about my writing process. So I'll sit down to write about something and I'll think, man, I'm excited to see what I think about this topic. So it's just kind of I approach it that way rather than here's what I think about the topic already. I want it to be a learning process. So that's how I kind of approach the writing process. But then reading, I think, is so important to read. So I love, if I wasn't doing what I was doing, I'd be a history teacher. I love reading history so much. And if you can make history engaging to write or to read, you can make anything engaging to read. So I like reading really good history. Um, but I think a lot of people, one, don't read, but when they do, I think they do it wrong.
Mm.
So I think if you're so the other day, you and I think Goodman was talking about how if you're not timing, you're not sprinting.
Hmm.
My view is if you're not reading with a pen, you're not reading.
See,
So
I do it with a Kindle.
there you go.
But the highlight feature of a Kindle is my favorite thing because I don't have to have a pen.
There
Um,
you go.
and I don't know if people know this, but at any time I can go back and find my Kindle and go to notes and hit print, and out of my printer comes everything I highlighted from that book.
Yeah.
And so I agree with that as well. Even if
Nice.
I'm reading a novel,
Oh,
I want to
especially.
remember quotes and things.
Exactly. So I keep it's called a commonplace book. So commonplace book, a little notebook that if I'm reading, and something like a word I don't know comes up, I'll write it down and then I'll write down the definition. Or a quote, like you said, comes up, I'll write down the quote. Or I think authors appreciate when a reader is having a dynamic conversation with their work. So I'll write down my thoughts about what the book is saying, juxtapose it to books I've read on the topic previously. So like this said this, but this says this. I wonder what is true. And I'll try to extrapolate it. But I think the best thing that you can do, and learning literature has kind of said this, is learning isn't about quantity of exposure, but quantity and quality of recall. So what I usually try to do is if there's a quote I really like, I'll go to my book and I'll try to write it down from memory. So I'll try to write the quote down from memory and then I'll write like uh, a synthesis of what I think about it because I'm forcing myself to try to recall and remember the content. I don't just look at the book and then write it down, write a word, look at the book, write a word. I try to actually be engaged in that process. And the studies have shown that that makes you actually retain significantly better.
And we're getting down to the end here, but give me three great book recommendations.
So, Destiny of the Republic is probably my favorite
About
biography.
about
It's about
what?
it's about a president, Garfield, President Garfield,
Okay.
and so he was a true Renaissance man. So I
And
like
the name of the book again?
Destiny of the Republic.
Destiny of the Republic.
Yes. So he was the first president to ever give a speech in a different language. So he had a bunch of German immigrants from his town that came to his house, and he's like, "Oh, these are all Germans. Let me speak to them in German." So he gave a speech in German. It's so cool. But then the reason that book has really made an impact on me is because so he was assassinated pretty early into his term, and the doctors killed him. Basically, the bullet didn't kill him. The doctors did when they were trying to do surgery without disinfecting everything that was going on. But in that time, it was a badge of honor for surgeons to have really dirty vests because it showed they'd done a lot of work.
Yeah, they wash their hands after surgery,
Yeah, yeah,
not before.
right, exactly. So
Yeah.
they would have these blood-soaked vests and be like, "Look at how much work I've done today," and then they'll go work on somebody else. But at the time, that was what was accepted as best practice. So that has helped me constantly reflect, like, what am I doing today that I think is best practice that later is going to be the reason my athletes weren't as good as they could be, or the reason my students weren't as good as they can be. And then I try to have this constant state of reflection to ensure that that is never the case.
That's one book. Give me two more.
So, oh man, Notes from Underground by Dostoevsky is really good. If nothing else, there's a line in that book that says humans can be characterized as a thing that goes on two legs and is ungrateful.
And you read that without being assigned that book?
Yeah.
I love it.
So
I read War and Peace without being assigned once.
nice.
Yeah, yeah.
So I got to be honest, because my wife, if she listens to this, so I've read half of it. And so I read half of it, and then I got distracted by another book. But I made the mistake of rating it on Goodreads without reading the whole thing. And my wife was like, she saw where I was in it because she started reading it. She's like, "Didn't you rate this on Goodreads and you haven't read the whole thing? You're a liar." And I was like, "Oh shoot, I didn't think anyone would ever know." So it was
Sounds like
hilarious.
my wife.
Yep.
Call me out.
Um, but I love that quote because I truly think that being in a constant state of gratitude makes it significantly easier to just be in a good mood all the time rather than focusing on that which you wish you had.
Cool.
So that's two. And then I would be remiss if I didn't say the Bible is third, specifically the book of James, because it's Jesus's brother. Um, if anyone's going to be critical of a sibling, if anyone's going to be critical of you, it's going to be a sibling. So I think it's interesting to read the book of James. But specifically in the book of James, there's a verse that says, "The anger of man does not bring about the righteousness of God." So it doesn't matter what your creed or religion is. The idea that just because you're super angry about something doesn't mean you're right about it. So I think that so many coaches and so many people, specifically in the current political mess we're in,
Mhm.
um, just because you're super mad about something doesn't mean you're right about it. And just because you're super mad about something doesn't mean the way you're going about trying to elicit change is the right way.
When that came up, I just saw the quote the other day that people with soft beliefs, when they're criticized, harden their beliefs.
That's so good.
Isn't that great about our political situation right now?
Yeah.
Like there are people who had soft beliefs of something, but because they felt attacked for those beliefs, they
It
went
deepens
from
it.
A to Z, man. I mean,
Yep.
now they're like ready to shoot people
Yep.
for those beliefs that were never strong in the first place.
That's
And
so good.
it reminds you that I need reminded a lot because I get pissed off at people that think dumb things, and I have to remember that by attacking them, they're just going to become more stubborn in their
That's so
beliefs.
good. That's
And
so good to remember.
hopefully, I think I'm getting better when I present. I used to enjoy stomping on people's feet, like
Yeah.
I'm here to I'm not here to bring us all together. I'm here to polarize us
Yeah,
into, the people who do it right and the people who should change. And
yeah.
I think I find common ground better than I used to. And you
That's
do
such a
that.
good skill.
It it's everything, isn't it?
Yeah,
I mean, our country would be so much better, but we have two political parties that thrive on warfare.
yeah,
Like just
yeah.
banging heads.
To kind of go off what you said there, one of my other favorite verses is First Peter 3:15, which says, "Always be prepared to give a reason for the hope that you have." Always be prepared to give a reason for the hope that you have. And again, extrapolate that into coaching and extrapolate that into teaching. So when parents or students or athletes ask me a question, I should have a really good answer. And it's disrespectful if I don't. So I want to make sure that I always have a super well-grounded reason for why I'm having another parent's kid do the thing that I'm having them do.
And that's hard to do at the age of 32, unless you're a coach's kid
Yep.
and you've read a bunch of books and you get asked a lot of questions. I have become so much better at answering questions because I've answered them for a long time now. And
Yeah.
and so those things make you seem wise, but it's just practicing your craft
Yeah.
and
And
getting
not getting
better.
defensive. And not getting defensive when questions come.
Correct. Correct. I like that. Dylan, this has been absolutely fantastic. This is once in a while with a podcast, it's like, holy shit, people are gonna love this. And it's, I can tell you enjoyed it and I've loved it. And like everybody says, oh yeah, like everybody has a podcast. Well, not everybody has a good one.
That's right.
And the thing that's missing in our world is two human beings being able to talk for 90 straight with total focus.
Yeah.
And that's what we just did. 90
Yeah.
straight minutes of total focus, feeding off each other. I feel good. People are going to love this. So thank you so much. Is there anything that you want to say, promoting your book or how to find you and those kinds of things?
Sure. So my book is Breaking the Speed Barrier: How Elite Coaches Teach Speed. It's $25, but the amount of resources, there's a QR code in the back that links to a whole bunch of stuff. Um,
Is it on
it,
Kindle?
it is on Kindle, although it just flagged me for some reason. So I got to make some edits. So, but again, like I said, I like hard copies because I like making notes.
Yep.
Um, so the amount of resources, there's whole programs for track seasons, for off seasons, in seasons. So the amount of extra resources I think makes it significantly more valuable than $25. I teach a class at Winona State called Techniques of Speed Development for Coaches, and that's $2,000 for the semester. I took all the content that I teach in that class and I put it in this book for 25 bucks. So if you're unsatisfied with your learning experience, I'll send you a free copy or I'll refund your money. So it's on Amazon. Go check it out. I'm on X, just at Dillon Martinez. Um, Thank you so much for this opportunity. So the dean of the College of Education here at Winona State always says that attention is our most valuable resource. So like you said, 90 minutes of attention, and I know how desperately people want your attention specifically. So thank you so much.
It was great. Thank you. And I think we will talk again.
I have a feeling we will.